For me, it was in 2011, and Fukushima had happened, and it shook me. Like it shook me in a way that was just like, oh, stuff's going down in the world. I need to like prepare, you know? And I started to like store food and water and become a bit of a prepper, waiting for like the big earthquake or whatever. And that went on for like a month or two. And then I realized that, oh, what I need to do to prepare for whatever's coming in our lifetime is to get into my heart. Like that's it. I just need to get into my heart. And I have lived in ashrams in India in my 20s and like have just been seeking different spiritual paths my whole life, but I knew I didn't have it. Like I was missing something. And I mentioned it to a friend and she said, "You need to read this book by Drunvalo called Living in the Heart." And I was like, Drunvalo, I knew of him because he wrote those Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life books. And I used to live in Ashland, Oregon, a very hippie town. And back in the day, people always used to like, they had VHS tapes of the Flower of Life workshop, and people would make copies of copies of copies of it so that the quality was so grainy. And people would just sit around fascinated and gather in groups and watch the Flower of Life workshop, right? And just like blow their minds. And I was never interested in it. Like it just seemed super intellectual and like math, and like just my brain wasn't a lot attached, like getting into it. So when she said, "Oh, you should read this Drunvalo book," I thought, Drunvalo, that's not maybe not for me. And she said, "No, this is different. This is all about the heart. You will love this." And so I read the book and got it from the library in Portland. They have all his books at the Portland Library. That was amazing. As soon as I started to read it, I couldn't put the book down till I was finished. Like it just resonated so deeply for me. Like I was like, I believe you. Like this is far out and this makes total sense to me on some level, even maybe beyond beneath like logic. Like I just knew it deeply. So then, of course, I read every book he had. I watched every YouTube video. I just dove in. Like so many people who I end up meeting in this world have done similar. And then I went online and found that he had just that day, the day that I decided to say, like, hey, is he still alive? Is he still teaching? What's going on with this guy? And I went online and he had just announced a brand new workshop called Awakening the Illuminated Heart. It was previously he was teaching the Earth Sky Heart workshop. And before that was the Earth Sky workshop. And before that was the Flower of Life workshop, which you can watch on Gaia TV. If you have a subscription, they have put a lot of his old Flower of Life workshop videos up on there to watch. And it's super fun to go through that. But the work has evolved just as we have continued to evolve. And so information becomes outdated as we are ready to achieve new levels or access things in different ways. So the work kept evolving. And in 2011, Drunvalo was given the guidance that it was time to change the order that the Merkaba was offered. So the way that Drunvalo was talking about activating the Merkaba in the Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life books, and even in the Living in the Heart book, is the old way, I guess you could say, of activating the Merkaba. Because at the time, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, what he says is people were so intellectual and coming from their brain that they weren't really ready to access activating their natural heart-based living Merkaba field. So what happened is the answer became, well, let's teach them how to create a synthetic Merkaba around themselves that they can do and activate every day, like a Merkaba meditation where you would create this Merkaba. But because you're creating it and it's synthetic, it would only last a day or two. So it became a meditation that you had to do every day. The Merkaba meditation was very popular and people did it for a long time. So in 2011, that's when Drunvalo was given the guidance that now is the time. People are ready to activate their real, organic, living Merkaba, which was the way it was always intended to do, but we weren't ready. So it's almost like the synthetic version of activating the Merkaba created an opening, and it gave people an experience of it, and it elevated to a certain level. And then we can elevate to the next level by now doing it from the heart. So that was what the change was in the Awakening the Illuminated Heart workshop. And in the past, the Merkaba was the first thing that was taught. And then once you were able to activate your Merkaba, then you could maybe start to go into the heart and access all these other things. Well, in this way of doing it, the Merkaba is the last thing that is actually activated. You have to be in your heart and have access to getting into the sacred and the tiny space of your heart. You have to be able to activate your beams of light, open your third eye, and then from that state of consciousness in a very specific meditation way, your natural heart-based Merkaba comes online. And the beauty of doing it this way is that you can't get it wrong because you're not actually creating it. You're actually just getting in alignment. And then your natural field, which everyone has around them in a template form, it's just not activated yet. Those star tetrahedrons are just not spinning. So in this way, it's almost like they just naturally come online and then they start to spin. So you can't get it wrong. And also the other thing that's great about it is that people, when they did it in the old way, they could still have their egos very much intact and activate their Merkaba. And this definitely created a lot of problems in the world because people would activate their Merkaba, go to a Drunvalo workshop and activate it, and then learn how to do the meditation and activate it. But with the ego still intact, because they were just doing it from the mind, people would go, oh, I'm going to go teach this and I'm going to change the spinning ratios of the Merkabas or teach people to spin octahedrons and change stuff. And Drunvalo was given very specific guidance about how to do this properly. So that created some problems. So in this way, you have to really get into that pure space of the heart first. And people don't tend to run with it and try to become teachers of it themselves and change different ways. The first time Drunvalo offered this to the world, 2011 in November. And I got to be at that workshop because I happened to go online and see, is this guy even still teaching? You know, what's going on with him? I immediately bought a ticket as soon as I saw that it was for sale. And then later I found out it sold out in a matter of a few hours. So super lucky and meant to be that I got into that training. And since it was the first time he offered it to the world, even though he had had Flower of Life facilitators in the past, a lot of them didn't want to come over and be Awakening the Illuminated Heart teachers because they actually got attached to the old way of doing the Merkaba and they wanted to stay with it. So he had to train new people to be Awakening the Illuminated Heart facilitators. And so at the last day of the workshop, which by the way was so amazing, it was my first time in Sedona, and I'm with like 140 people around the world. I was having the time of my life. Every day I would be like, oh my God, this is the most important information I have ever learned. And so on the last day, he said, I want to train 100 people from around the world to be my facilitators, to teach this. I was practically like jumping out of my seat. You know, I just knew that that was for me. And so I applied. And then in January of 2012, he was teaching a training of these people he had selected from around the world in Mexico for 2 weeks. And I suddenly found myself in Mexico with Drunvalo and 100 people from around the world he had selected and learned to do this work and was made a teacher and then even eventually became one of his assistants and helped him teach other teachers. And now I live one town over from him and I'm in contact with him regularly and working on new stuff. So it's just been amazing. And I have taught over 100 of these Awakening the Illuminated Heart workshops over the past 12 years. So I live and breathe it. I love it. I'm as enthusiastic about it as I was on day one because it's so amazing. And I just see how it transforms people's lives. I mean, Philippe, you were just talking about one meditation and how that transforms your life, right? So to be with people on a 4-day journey and just watch how that just shifts everything, it just lights me up. And, you know, I'm in my mid 50s now. And sometimes, you know, the ego might come in and say like, oh, shouldn't I be teaching my own body of work by now? Like, where's my offering? You know, like that little voice you have. And then I come back to like, why reinvent the wheel? Like this work is amazing and beautiful. I am happy to be on Team Melchizedek and just be sharing this work because what he brought through is a masterpiece. And so I'm happy to just be his cheerleader and share the work in this way. And one of the things that I love the most about this body of work is that to me, it's sovereignty training. Like that's not words that Drunvalo would use. He doesn't call it that, but for me, like that's one term that I would put on it because it's like kind of a workshop to end all workshop. His philosophy is that we have everything we need inside of ourselves. We don't need technology, and we don't need other teachers and gurus and initiations and activations and Shakti pot and all the things that come from others. We can access all of this stuff directly. So it's kind of like, even though it is a workshop, it is a workshop in a way to empower you so that you don't need workshops anymore, because we have our own direct connection to our higher self. And so that's one of the first things we do in the workshop is an opening ceremony to connect to the higher self. And you can actually watch that. So not only on Gaia is there the Flower of Life workshops, but there's also the Earth Sky Heart workshop. The last time he taught that workshop in July of 2011, they recorded it, and I believe it's still on Gaia TV. I have the DVD set, which you can buy. It's like 14 DVDs, and the Flower of Life workshop is 28. So, it's days of material. But in that, you can see him doing the higher self ceremony. So we do that in the beginning of the workshop to connect with our higher self. Just that, just getting the connection to your higher self is profound, because down here in the third dimension, somehow we have blinders on. Like, we don't get to know our past lives, who we were, why we came into this life, where we even are. Like, it's all such a weird mystery for us here. And so there's a veil, there's a frequency fence, there's something going on in the veil of forgetting in the reincarnation cycle where we forget. And maybe a few people remember, children sometimes remember until it fades away. But if we make the connection to our higher self, they don't have the blinders on that we do. And so we can start to get answers, and especially if you can start to develop a direct dialogue type communication with your higher self, then you can start asking all these questions and get really clear on who you are, why you're here, what you're intending to do, where you came from, all that kind of stuff. So that's really empowering. Then you don't really need much outside of yourself at all, right? You can get your direct guidance directly within. And another reason that it's sovereignty training to me is that we learn to access the tiny space of the heart. And so who's read the Living in the Heart book besides Tammy? Philippe, Melanie, you haven't read that book yet, right? Okay, so I'll explain a little bit. So in that book, he talks about going into the sacred space of your heart and the tiny space of the heart. And these are your sacred inner temples, is kind of how I like to call it. And the sacred space is the space that you would go travel into first. And it is connected to your upper heart chakra. It is your personal sacred space. There wouldn't be other people there. It's like you being in your own inner sanctuary. And then the tiny space of the heart. And we're going to talk a lot more about that and actually do a meditation today to go into that. The tiny space of the heart is the space of God and unity consciousness. It is inside the sacred space of the heart, and it's a very small space that is the unified field. Like, your tiny space and my tiny space are actually the same place. It is the place of absolute oneness and God consciousness. And so we can learn to go into that place, and in that, the records of everything, the Akashic records of anything that's ever happened, in that, because you're in the unified field, you could connect with any teacher or loved one, connect with your higher self. And so you have access. Time is spherical. There's no time. There's no past, present, or future. It's all now. And so in that space, boy, does that open up a lot and let you navigate and learn anything that you might need to learn. And then we also learn to activate our beams of light, which you were talking a little bit before about, Melanie, about the light coming out of your head. So we've got these antennas that come out of our head. We kind of call them antennas, but they are like extensions of your pineal chakra, which is in the direct center of your head. And they come out of the head about a hand's distance. And they're kind of just like feelers. They're like antennas. And they allow a person to be that much more psychic and tuned in, so that you're navigating in the world and you don't have to second guess anything. Like, I trust my intuition 100% at this point, after feeling these beams almost like living parts of my body for so long. It's not the main reason that we activate them so we can become psychic. Like, this workshop isn't advertised as a come get psychic workshop, but it's a side effect. and it's a very cool one. The main purpose of the workshop is to get us to activate our heart-based living Merkaba so that way we can ascend. And what that means is either when we die at the end of our life, we will traditionally, what most people do at the end of their life, according to so many ancient texts, and according to Drunvalo as well, is we die and we get looped right back into the reincarnation cycle. And we're just forgetted, harvested, forgetting, harvested over and over and over. And so if you, because your memories get wiped when you die, well, what Drunvalo learned is that memories are held magnetically. There's a magnetic sheath around each brain cell, and it can be wiped out by heavy magnets. And so if you have an activated Merkaba, when you die, it creates an electromagnetic field around you that is going to keep your memories intact. So then you aren't subject to the mind wipe, and you can keep your consciousness intact, and from there go on to other levels of existence and not just have to loop over and start again. So this is incredible. So at the end of the workshop and the closing letter that Drunvalo reads, he even says, you know, congratulations, this is your last life on earth, and before you go on to next levels of existence. Of course, many people choose to come back here as volunteers and just be part of the team awakening, you know, but that's an option, you know, to be free is the goal. It doesn't mean we have to leave this place. But to be here and be free would be so different than to be here and be locked into the cycle of life and death and life and death. And, you know, the Buddhists know about this and the cycle of samsara and suffering. You know, when you start looking at it through that lens, you know, is this really a heaven realm? Is this a hell realm? You know, who knows? But nonetheless, to be free and to be able to have choice, there's your sovereignty piece right there. Another reason about ascension, not just if you die at the end of your life. Now, say ascension were to happen in our lifetime. And what Drunvalo means by that is Mother Earth herself, this third dimension of the earth, is getting ready to shift to the next level of being. And that is what is commonly called ascension. Mother Earth herself transitioning from third dimension to fourth dimension. Sometimes we hear 5D, and yes, that's a goal, but what Drunvalo says is we have to follow the progression, first from third dimension to fourth dimension to fifth dimension. And what will happen when Mother Earth is ready to shift is the Earth's magnetic field will drop down to zero. So the North and the South Pole are held magnetically by the Earth's electromagnetic field. And when the field weakens, that's what can create a pole shift on the Earth, whether a partial one or even a full flip. And what can happen if the Earth's magnetic field were to drop down to zero is that would wipe out people's memories. Because as we said, your memories are held magnetically. So the first astronauts that they sent into outer space, you can actually research this online. They were Russian, and they sent them into outer space and they lost all their memories. They had to go retrieve them because they were like gobbledygook, like babies. They knew nothing. And they thought, well, that was a weird anomaly. They sent the second astronaut into outer space, as I remember it. And then the same thing happened to him. So they figured out that, oh, you have to create a facsimile, a duplicate of the Earth's magnetic field around a person at all times, or their memories will get wiped. So then they started to create these little boxes that the astronauts would wear so their memories could maintain intact and they would maintain the Earth's magnetic field. So if you have a Merkaba around you and say the Earth was getting ready to go to the fourth dimension and do a dimensional shift, usually a dimensional shift is preceded by a pole shift. So that's the first step. So first, the Earth's magnetic field weakens and weakens, and it has been weakening, right? Magnetic north has moved to Siberia. Like we are in interesting times. And so that's another reason why maybe it's getting closer. And if it moves down to zero and people lose their memories, and then we have a dimensional shift, people aren't going to have any consciousness to ride the wave. But if you've got your Merkaba intact, and so now you're conscious and you can consciously go through the veil in between the third and the fourth dimension. There's like the 3 days of darkness, or the void that is in between dimensions, just like notes on a piano. There's a note and then there's dissonance until you get to the next note that is in harmony. So the third dimension and the fourth dimension, there's also space between them. And that is what Drunvalo talks about, was you can go consciously through that with a Merkaba field. So another reason why that sovereignty piece, and having the Merkaba and having all these tools activated. We also learn about prana breathing, which is taking in prana, life force energy, chi, from the fourth dimension and bringing it in to the third to fuel and charge up and run your Merkaba field. The Merkaba is a fourth dimensional technology. It has to be, to get through the void into the fourth dimension. Nothing from the third dimension can go through that void and be in the fourth dimension, because it is like the veil. Anything that's man-made will collapse and dissolve. And to get to the fourth, you've got to have a fourth dimensional vehicle, which the Merkaba is. When we got to the fourth, we would naturally change our Merkaba to the next level, like the fifth dimensional Merkaba, so that we could go onward. So we learn to pull life force energy from the fourth dimension into the third to fuel ourselves up and be running in a field of fourth dimensional energy all the time. It's the fuel almost that the Merkaba needs to keep spinning. I did just want to put this out there, is that I'm also available for personal sessions, like one-on-one spiritual counseling, or anything about the workshop, or just about the spiritual path in general. I make myself available and for that. So if you want to talk out anything or work through healing anything in that way,